Yeah, so maybe we can start just briefly the panel with, John and Phil, you guys have already introduced yourself, but maybe just like a quick opening statement, and then Garrett and Marjolein would be great to just give a little bit of an introduction, your background, kind of what is your initial kind of view into the topic of the panel, and then we'll take it from there.
Oh, I thought you were going to start with Marjolein, please.
Yeah. Okay. We can do that. I think we have a couple of slides if we can put them on. And sorry, Seamus, you're going to be a little bit smaller for a little bit, but and I'll grab the clicker from over here. It should work. So, can we? Yeah, the tech team, can we pull up the slides, please? And there's a clicker for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Comforting message. Is this okay? Is the audio okay? Is it working? Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here.
Absolutely.
As a legal and regulatory specialist, that is, of course, a great experience. I had so many great conversations already here, and that is really what is needed. We need a dialogue between technology, innovation on the one hand, and regulation, regulators and authorities on the other hand. That is also, I think, exactly the reason why I was invited, because I'm a partner at Bird & Bird, but I'm also leading the European Blockchain Sandbox, which is an initiative of the European Commission. We are providing a framework for a dialogue, a regulatory dialogue between innovators on the one hand and regulators and authorities on an EU and national level on the other hand, cross-border, to identify regulatory issues, challenges, and also to identify solutions and best practices. So for change between innovators and regulators and authorities, it's a constructive dialogue in an informal and confidential setting. The outcomes of the dialogues, to the extent that they can be published, are made known in best practices reports that are published by the European Commission and by us as a project team, and are available for the whole community. And by doing that, we hope to contribute to not only regulatory compliance, but also enhancing actually efficient and effective compliance with regulation, and also making the most of the regulatory tools that are there. Few words, perhaps the next slide. No,
yeah, you have
me.
the clicker, yeah.
Okay.
The green one.
Well, yeah. So how are we doing that? It's a 3-year project, 2023, 2024, 2025. We work with a group of 20 selected companies in each cohort. So we had 20 use cases selected in the first cohort. We currently work with 20 selected use cases in the second cohort. And we are very happy that OriginTrail is one of the selected companies in the second cohort that are working with us in these regulatory dialogues. It's a great use case. It's at the intersection between DLT, blockchain, and AI. So that is very, very relevant for the European Blockchain Sandbox. There will be a third cohort coming up. The application and selection process for the third cohort will start by the end of November of this year. It's a 2 months application process, so that's a next round. And that will be, for this project, the final round. It's a great project to work on. It's really constructive. It's regulation at its best, I would say, also for innovators. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marjolein. Maybe, yeah, Garrett, if you mind taking, you need the clicker, I guess, as well. You have a couple of slides.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so take it away.
Hi, everybody. I always feel like a singer when I have a mic like this. But I'm not a singer. I am the founder and managing director of Church of Oak Distillery, which may pop up on screen.
Yeah, just, it was here. There we go.
There we go. That's a picture of the place. So Church of Oak is a distillery that we started building in Ireland 5 years ago. We're still building it, actually, in fact. It's a big place. But it was around that time, maybe I got introduced to Seamus, who is maybe small on screen or can hear me now. And we were beginning to think about our supply chain. So you stand in a building like that and you think, okay, where do we get our grain? And at that point, I remember the point quite well, we delved back into the history of the building. It was an old mill and malting facility. And luckily enough, there was grain available locally. It's in Kildare, just outside of Dublin in Ireland. And this began the OriginTrail journey, really. We began to think heavily about our supply chain. We all know that there's this kind of convergence of technology. I didn't know what blockchain was or AI or anything like that at this point in time. I was thinking agricultural, really. And then we began to kind of supercharge our technology, really. And that's when we began to speak to BSI around certification. We can go down that road. And their technology partner that we got introduced to Jurij and the guys in OriginTrail. And so began our journey, and we can talk about it as we go. But we began to think about, as I said, our supply chain, but also out the other side, our customer, what they wanted, and how we would begin to kind of communicate with them. And we have those words, trust, traceability, and transparency on the screen. We very much think about that, and we've kind of built our process. I was interested in the guys talking earlier on. This, to me, is about process, product, people, and data. And that's how we think every day. And we began to build a decentralized knowledge graph around that. But we can get into it with the guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. That's a very cool intro. I think we have Seamus left. So Seamus, maybe just a quick introduction also from your end.
Sure. Thanks, Jurij, and thanks, OriginTrail team. Really appreciate being a part of this DKGcon. And just to introduce myself, I'm Seamus Galvin. I'm an innovation business partner in BSI. I've been a part of BSI since about 2017. And at the time, I think, it was BSI is best known for development of standards and are central to the global standards ecosystem, to certification, to audit, and these ultimately they're instruments of trust. They're enablers of trust. And I think my role is I'm part of the corporate digital innovation team, and it's really what innovations and what technologies there and what affordances are there to improving trust. So I think that's what brought ourselves and OriginTrail together, and we'll speak to that in the panel. But it's really for us, it's BSI sells trust. It's how does technology in its different forms, converged forms, improve how we enable trust for our clients. So nice to meet you all virtually.
Thanks, Seamus. And maybe actually we can, is my mic on? Yeah? Okay, it is. Something difficult to hear. Maybe we can just extend, actually, stay with you, just because we have implemented a lot of OriginTrail-based solutions together over the years with BSI. You were part of many of them. Can you reflect a little bit on how kind of these solutions have evolved and kind of continue to evolve to enable this AI trust and reliability actually being used in the context of BSI's business, right? In the business that, or the services that you provide to your customers.
Sure, yeah. And I think, again, I suppose back the timeline, it was around 2017, 2018. The latest instrument to trust was blockchain, and we were all, it had been around a while, but it was new to a lot of people at the time. And for us, it was, well, it's an interesting technology. How can it enable trust for clients? How can it enhance what we already do? We were working with an ecosystem to understand that. OriginTrail, what we liked about OriginTrail was, there was obviously blockchain at the core, but they had clearly thought about it more holistically. Blockchain was just an enabler among other things. So like a lot of organizations, we looked for, well, where can this technology improve us? And a lot of it was around credentialing. So we issue standards, for example. We issue certificates. There's counterfeit issues with some of those, and copyright issues with some of those as well, depending on who might be using them or misrepresenting them. And OriginTrail helped us understand what solutions we could provide to increase trust in credentialing. That was the first quick win use case, and OriginTrail have built several of those solutions for us that are still live today. Then we were looking more broadly, some of the things John talked about and Garrett talked about there. We are stewards of ecosystems of trust, really. So where organizations are sharing audit information, they're sharing supply chain information, and we have implemented those using combinations of people and process, but also how can we improve data sharing? How can we improve data security? So we have a couple of instances of that. So like the Scan Trusted Factory program you may have heard of before. That was one where OriginTrail came in and enabled us to greatly increase the trust and credibility of the data and credentialing that was being shared. And it taught us a lot about decentralized thinking as well, so that the old way of doing things was kind of more centralized. By doing things in a decentralized way, we actually get an awful lot of benefits in terms of data privacy and data security, and also commercial benefits as well. And while we've worked with OriginTrail, we've been involved in other ecosystems where understanding those decentralized principles has really been important. So right now, emissions management and sharing of emissions data is a big example there. And we've done projects with the logistics industry where decentralized principles apply. So there's different protocols that can be used, and obviously OriginTrail is one. And the final point, I think, we started off as blockchain, but within a year or two, we stopped speaking about blockchain. We started talking about things like supply chain trust, supply chain integrity, and also the convergence. Really, to achieve trust, it's the convergence of blockchain with AI, with semantic web. And I think working with OriginTrail kind of gave us that holistic understanding early, and we've benefited from that. So it's been a great partnership and journey so far. And we've also, of course, worked and collaborated with Garrett, who's a really good example of an organization on a certification journey, how they're looking to build digital and advanced technology thinking into that process to increase trust in their own products for their clients as well.
Thanks, Seamus. And that actually is a great segue into Garrett. So Church of Oak looks at AI also more from let's say, the value it can deliver from a consumer-facing perspective, right? So how did maybe you can also reflect a little bit, how did the OriginTrail DKG kind of enable you to do that? And how do you see this connection between, do you see AI really connecting your consumers to your supply chain, or where do you see its major role playing in your scenario?
Yeah, it's that convergence, isn't it? So I take a kind of a eyes wide open approach to it. And when we first dipped our toe into this world, we didn't quite know where it was going to go. And I think the two lenses that I look through is on the supply chain, and then on the consumer side, the interest level in that supply chain. And I think we're seeing that across food and bev, and I'm sure across other industries as well. And there was a lack of trust there in whiskey. Sometimes if somebody's buying a bottle of Macallan in China, are they really buying a bottle of Macallan in China? And in Irish whiskey, people would be surprised that the most dominant grain is French maize. So it was the convergence of like kind of ESG technology and AI, blockchain. It was everything coming together. And what we tried to do was look at the supply chain for our own purposes, so that we can learn, measure, and improve. And we follow what we call as the grain to glass journey. Farm to fork. We've kind of all heard it. But to live it is quite difficult, as the guys kind of alluded to earlier on. Thankfully, our supply chain is quite simple, and it's predominantly local. But it goes global when we talk about bourbon barrels from America, Spanish barrels, ex-sherry. So how do we bring it all together? And then I suppose from the consumer point of view, it's the storytelling. So knowledge is power. People want to have knowledge. People have knowledge in their pockets now. Whether they trust it or not is we can talk about it. But it's what we were trying to do was bring trust to that knowledge, and people seemed quite eager to know how the whiskey was made, from what farm, and the ESG sustainability credentials across that. And what we're trying to do is add storytelling. We can't forget about the people in the process. Sometimes it's all about the technology, but it's how do you wrap that in a consumer-facing application, which is what we worked on with you guys. And so you scan your QR, and it will tell you what you want to know, and we can go layers deep into that. And then we've wrapped that with the BSI standards and that trust in the data. I hope we're doing a good job. It's not fully there yet, but you got to go on that journey. So we never forgot about the consumer, but equally, we're looking at our kind of digital core and our tech stack within the four walls and across the supply chain to try and learn where we can look for efficiencies and improvements. But we gotta. It's kind of shit in, shit out. But it's kind of like it's about really good quality data going in. And now we're building, like, I didn't know what an ERP was a few years ago, but now I do. So it's building that digital core that we can spin off in the future. And we see a lot of different possibilities. Direct to consumer would be one of those.
Great, thank you, Garrett. Yeah, it's been really exciting working with you guys, and I think one of the things that often comes up is also that you guys have to obviously deal with is regulation, right? So there's a lot of things, especially we talked about also EUDR, the deforestation regulation and whatnot, and here I think it'd be cool to kind of look into, from your angle, Marjolein, and I just noticed we have the same shoes. So good taste, I guess. But it would be great to see, to get your perspective on. You mentioned that the EU blockchain sandbox tries to balance this innovation with regulation, right? So how do you see this balance being done? How do you do it there? And what are maybe the main obstacles that you see with regulation, especially in the, let's say, global context now, where we hear a lot of time, European Union is over-regulating AI and whatnot?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and the comment on about the shoes. First of all, already the part of the question, where do you see the obstacles in regulation? And of course, AI solutions need to be compliant to be credible and to develop into maturity in applications. Compliance is one of the essential factors, and that is not only the AI Act. That is also, for instance, the GDPR. It's also cybersecurity regulation. It's also data regulation. So it's actually quite a lot, and we try to help there in the European Blockchain Sandbox at the initiative of the European Commission to help companies understand what the relevant laws and regulations are and what it takes to be compliant, to stay compliant, and to make compliance more effective and efficient. But there is one additional element, and that is so important and underestimated, and that is that AI is also a very important functionality to enhance compliance with other regulations. If we are talking about supply chain and verifiable credentials, we call that attested accreditations in regulation. And that is a very important term, because that is the element that will be used by the regulators and authorities to see whether a company, a supply chain, is compliant with deforestation regulation, with ESG, other types of ESG regulation, with digital product passports, whatever. And there, AI is a crucial tool. In my experience, I'm a lawyer, but that is what I see happening in the sandbox. I think it's a crucial tool, but the bridge between this crucial tool and regulation, that needs to be there. It needs to be given, going with such comforts that the regulators and authorities say, yes, this is what we can rely for our supervising purposes. And that is, I think, that's a big challenge, and there are regulatory instruments that are there to help there. If we are discussing digital identity regulation, the eIDAS regulation that came into force in the second version this year, the system of trust services, attested accreditations as a qualified trust service, that possibility already. The fact that ledgers are now identified as trust services that can be qualified. Those are really very important tools in making this work, in bridging this gap between these fantastic new technologies on the one hand and making compliance with this whole broad range of regulations more efficient, more effective for both the actors, the parties in the market, also for the supervising authorities. So, sorry.
Thank you. No, that's a very good and comprehensive answer. And I think actually looking at this regulation usually is, there's no, or very few, probably no global regulation, right? And I think, John, I have a question for you. You've been looking at supply chains globally, right, for quite a while now. How do you see the regulatory aspect now? I think with artificial intelligence, it's become even more important or even more, let's say, divisive in a certain sense, because you have parts of the world where there's no regulation or very little regulation. You have parts of the world like the European Union where there's more. How do you see this impacting the deployment and the value of getting the value out of artificial intelligence in supply chains? Do you see it, blocking? Do you see it? It's okay. We're actually getting there. And how will this evolve in the future?
Gotcha. So good question, a big question. The first thing is, if we look at this panel, 2 have the same shoes, and there's 3 Irishmen. So I'm always looking at facts and figures and things we can extract. So if you look at regulation and supply chains, even with the EU now coming out, and there's something, by the way, if any of you are interested, look up the Brussels effect. The Brussels effect is very important. I just finished writing the report, co-authoring the report for EUDR on traceability. It was funded by the German government, and that'll be shareable very soon. But the Brussels effect is very important. So what happens in Brussels has this global, reverberate around the world. And that's unfortunate in some cases because we have to respect sovereignty of each individual nation. So we have to move at their pace. Unfortunately, their pace can be much, much slower. So we see that the Brussels effect is very real. It will have an impact, a positive impact. But I want to go back to what my core research is in transparency and trust. So if we go back to transparency, we can break it down into history-based transparency, so looking in the rearview mirror, blockchain. We can do operations-based transparency, which is like IoT devices and sensors, real-time information sharing. And we can go up to strategic transparency, which is working together to develop a particular market. And there's 3 different levels of trust in there as well. But without going into the details, when you put in contracts with your suppliers, and when governments put in regulations in a particular sector, listen to me carefully now, they're actually based on mistrust and distrust. Think about that. So when a government puts in a regulation, it's because they want to protect something, they want to block something, stop something that they know is happening. So it's actually based on mistrust and distrust. How can we get over that and overcome that? We can get over that and overcome that by all of the brilliant things that were talked about this morning. By the OriginTrail team, by the Amazon team, by the Microsoft guys, and everyone else that presented this morning. The technology can be an enabler of providing trusted information. You saw on the data that I shared from Edelman that the information quality is critical to moving all of this forward. So I think if we understand that regulations and contracts are based on mistrust and distrust, and we know that technology can be the enabler to break through that, that's where we need to get to.
That's a very good, also a very good answer, and it ties into actually standards to a certain degree as well, right? So transparency, Phil, you talked about standards before, right? So I think it's been your job for a few years now, exactly. So you know a thing or two about them, and specifically here we're talking about standards that enable, so data standards enable data connectivity, standards that enable verifiability. How do you, so I think from a technical angle, it's clear, right? That enables more reliable AI because we can really, once we have more clear, connected, verifiable data, we can trust the outputs of AI more. Does it also help, in your view, do standards also help, in your view, to actually be compliant or kind of follow the regulation, and maybe even go a step further to say standards can help shape the regulatory framework for artificial intelligence or other innovative technologies going forward? Or is that, a step too far?
No, there's an interplay between regulators and standards bodies, particularly the kind that Seamus works for. So regulators tend to talk to their national standards bodies like British Standards Institute or NBN in Brussels or whatever. And they, for those of us who worked in other standards bodies, it's a little bit odd because these standards you have to pay for and everything else. I've worked for many years in standards bodies that are community efforts that, oh, here, help yourself, go and do it. Even the word standard means different things to different people. And any standard, no matter who writes it, no matter where it is, no matter what the way it comes to life, it's nothing more or nothing less than the consensus of the people who both wrote it and who implement it. And all standards, with very few exceptions, are optional. And given a choice of 10 standards, you might choose number 1, I might choose number 5. And they don't interoperate. But I'm following a standard. So just on their own, they don't necessarily achieve anything, which comes back to something that everyone's talked about in their own way. It comes down to people. People are part of this. And one of the biggest cultural changes I had to go through, and I moved from working at W3C, particularly on open government data. So I'd be speaking to government departments, government regulators, or the kind of people who have lots of government-generated data. And the basic argument was, I'm a taxpayer, I paid for that, I want it. It doesn't work in the commercial world. And you come across some kind of obvious reasons for not sharing data, like you don't necessarily want to have transparency in your supply chain, because if I know that you got your grain from him, I'm going to miss you out and go to him and get the grain from there. I'm not going to come to you. So there's a very real commercial incentive to keep some of that to yourself. What I found, the biggest surprise I found, is the certification bodies. Certification bodies, their job is to assess your operation, your product, or whatever it may be, according to a standard. And then they issue the certificate. They don't want to make those certificates public, would you believe? Those certification bodies will not publish their catalogue of certificates. And you think, why the heck not? It's because if you're certifying against a particular standard, you've got competitors. So you don't want to publish your client list in front of your competitors. So, for example, we're talking all about these wonderful transparency and tools and everything else, and these certifications. The people might not want you to do that.
That's a very interesting angle to it because we also come from an open source, right? Kind of ecosystem. OriginTrail is open source. It's like, here's the code, help us improve it, help us drive the knowledge graph, make it better. But often, and I think Seamus will probably have also a thing or two to actually add, because that's a good point, right? We often also talk about different sorts of standards, right? We're talking about data standards in one hand. Seamus, BSI is often also called, right, the business standard company, right? And I think last time we spoke, you said ultimately we sell trust. And so how do you see the business standards that BSI is so heavily involved in? How do you see them kind of being redefined with the advance of artificial intelligence? And do you see them also actively helping to shape it? So not maybe from a pure regulation point of view, but more like what are the business best practices to get the most reliable use of artificial intelligence in your organization?
I'd agree with what Phil said, and you said, like, even the word standards, there's lots of different types of standards for different purposes, different organizations. I agree with Phil as well. Some of our clients, maybe publishing certificates can be an issue, but we endeavor wherever we can to publish our certificates, and they're available in a database, and that's always been the case. I would say, I think the role of AI is interesting. When we look at our standards world, the monolith of the industry has, a client thinks of a standard as a document about a topic, it's a PDF. That serves a certain purpose, but I think it's really the digital transformation agenda is how do we provide those in digital forms that are ever more useful, ever more flexible. And there's been lots of different ways of doing that, and the international standards industry has invested in smart standards and frameworks around that, and Phil, can talk at length about GS1's approach. But it's just interesting with AI how, even with NLP and with this advent of large language models, it's introduced very new and creative ways of thinking about how we make standards more available. So the big one that we're working on at the moment is it's that interplay between regulations and standards, where you know, a lot of our customer journeys start with people wanting to comply to a regulation, and that's the what, and then the standard is the how, and it's increasingly how can AI create a more seamless experience for customers, where when they're navigating one or more regulations, they can, you know, simultaneously also understand what topics or teams are in a standard, not just one standard, but across multiple standards. So, for example, we're working again on ESG reporting. So how can AI assistance be brought to bear for ESG reporting? You have a whole host of regulations, reporting frameworks in ESG. You have a whole host, broad range of ESG topics that the likes of Garrett has to consider as he's building out his distillery, for example. It's for each of those topics in relation to regulation, how can we provide standards in a much more flexible form so that the content is accessible? So I think there's a huge opportunity there around AI and the large language model piece. But then it goes back to what everyone is saying here. It's the trust in that data. It's the effectiveness of the AI. So if we're producing derivative content above regulations and standards, can we trust that AI generated content? And that goes back to the theme of this content. It's the semantic web. It's the underlying technologies that have been there, how they're integrated with this new kind of wave of AI. But if we can get that right, it does definitely make standards more relevant, I think, to some of the challenges that people are trying to solve.
Yeah, I think it plays very well into the whole connectivity thing that we talked about in the first part of, and also in this part of the sessions. It's when you're looking at a standard, right? Also, you're not looking at it in isolation, right? And that's the problem of reliability when you're trying to understand something. And you need that. That's where knowledge graphs can be really powerful as well, right? To connect all of these different standards between each other, also regulation and whatnot. And yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. I'm just moderating.
While we are on, while we are on the topic of standards, I must say, from a regulatory perspective, they are hugely important. There are references to standards that need to be adopted in virtually all digital regulatory instruments. So in cybersecurity, in the data regulation, in AI, in the eIDAS regulation, there's always a big part about standards. That is not voluntary standards. Those are mandatory standards. They are being developed, and I understand that it is complex, but what we have seen during the dialogues is that how important standards are, how big the need is of understanding the process, how to provide input there, and that is being facilitated. We try to address that also in the best practices report, to give clarity where to find the sources about the formal standards, where the process is, what is under construction or has already been developed and adopted. But the important point is there's adopted formal standards. They are part of the regulation. They are part of compliance. And one of the challenges, I think, is, and part of that bridge between innovation on the one hand and regulation on the other hand, is that the standards that are being developed by the market and that are functioning well, to see whether they can be credited in the formal standards that are adopted under the regulation.
Yeah, no, that's a very it's like a very nice take on it, and I think standards, Garrett, I think we spoke about this like a bit of a different angle to how also you can apply standards to your, in this case, supply chain. But when we're looking at organizations that usually operate in networks, right? So how do you apply a standard, to organizations that you don't control directly because you work in a network, but your product comes from across 100 different maybe suppliers, right? And you mentioned an interesting take on how AI is actually enabling also players upstream in the supply chain to become better, become more involved. I think you mentioned farmers that are becoming more literate, and that kind of helps all the things downstream. So what's your take on that? Because also standards need to be applied right across the board if they are to be. Otherwise, it's just the weakest link in the chain.
Yeah, I'm listening with interest here as well. I forgot I was on a panel. But it's like, my take is that there's going to be winners and losers on the standards. And sometimes they're there for the dark art reasons, really. We're in a heavily regulated industry, and so we should be, alcohol. So we're directly tied to revenue in Ireland, so they need their cut, and they want to make sure. I mean, there's a lot of history in that, but everyone wants their cut. And I was listening to Phil earlier on, and I was like, for me, I just want the customer. And if I was to go to America, there's the 3-tier system. Even here in Europe, it's like I've got to go through importers and wholesalers and retailers, and there's regulatory and compliance and standards along the way. But to circle back to the farmers is that, because it's all about the commercials come into it. Yeah? So I'm here talking about the commercial. Like, I want my margin. That's how I make money, right? But I want to be able to share my margin with the farmers, the people who are directly involved in the supply chain. If I'm giving it away at every point through taxes and regs, the whole way through the supply chain, I can't give value to the customer. And sometimes I think I don't know why I'm on this rant today, but it's like we have to look, what are the standards there for, where's the value chain for all of this? Because the value chain gets mixed up with the supply chain in this as well. And the farmers in Ireland, and I believe across the world, don't see enough value in what they're doing. We were talking about food. There's enough food. We don't know where it is, and there's so much food wastage. And this comes back to, again, what we're talking about in terms of the supply chain. I want to give value back to the people who make the product. And I think if I was to kind of go about how I'm going to do it with my dark arts, is that we're eventually, if we go in to enter, Holland, and we go, right, well, we're going to go through importer, distributor, retailer. But eventually somebody's going to scan our barcode, and I go, cool, I want you, and now I want a direct relationship with you. And that's what we've kind of built a little bit with you, Jurij, is, if they want to, of course, they scan that, we give value back through sharing our knowledge with them. And here's the supply chain. Here's the farmer that grew your grain. Here's the person that made the glass. Here's the, it doesn't sound very sexy, but yeast supplier. But it's like, these are the people involved in making the product that you so enjoy. And I don't want to share my margin around. And this is where I think the winners and losers will come. We're going to be actively trying to cut people out of the supply chain to give the value back to the people who, in my opinion, deserve the value. And we have to look at standards and regs, and like here we are talking about EUDR on one side. I don't know if everybody knows what that is. We won't go down the rabbit hole. But equally, like, we're looking at technical files for geographical indicators as well. Like Irish whiskey has to be made in Ireland. Champagne has to be made in Champagne. So the amount of paperwork, and this comes back to it, is that if we can have, ultimately, I want a cleaner supply chain. And there's a lot of hard work in teeing that up. So we're working actively behind the scenes. We're not on market yet, so please bear with us for a couple of years and then go out and buy the product. But it's we're trying to get this in place because it's so difficult in a fast-paced environment where now we're talking about AI when 3 years ago we weren't talking about AI. We were talking about blockchain. Now we're not talking about blockchain. So, but ultimately, yes, upstream and downstream, I want to be able to give the value back. And I want to also take some of that value for ourselves. And that's why I'm paying an awful lot of attention to an awful lot of areas, because things like what's happening in America, EUDR, tariffs, all this, like it upsets the supply chain, but ultimately the value chain alongside that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of variables to take into account. And you did mention one thing with Phil, right? So the thing that you scan on the end product, right? So maybe a question for you, Phil. We'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. So do you see the digital ink would be the new QR code or the new barcode that we would put on all new products and try to, now we're in the period of transition, right? So billions of products are becoming equipped with this. Do you see solutions such as what Garrett was mentioning, right, that enable through scanning just the product, being able to interact with it, get verifiable data on that product? Do you see kind of a symbiotic relationship, or GS1, so the digital link facilitating those types of solutions, and the other way around, so those types of solutions facilitating the adoption of the digital QR code?
Yes, pardon me. So I need to give you a bit of background because not everyone's going to know what Jurij is talking about. Pardon me. As part of this transition from a one-dimensional stripy barcode that you've all grown up with through a QR code, it has to have the same product identification system within that QR code, and it has to be a URL. Both those things. So it'll still go beeper to checkout. That checkout is not making an online lookup. It's not going off to the web and finding out what it is. It's just got the number just like a one-dimensional barcode today. But to your point, Jurij, yes, there are, I'm delighted to say, a lot of companies who are what we call solution providers, product cloud people, from big ones like Digimarc and Blue Byte to smaller ones like Polytag in the UK or whatever. And these people are offering, and going on to people like Garrett and saying, do you want to interact with your customer? After they bought that bottle of whiskey from you, and they want to share that experience. They want to give other people their ideas. Of course you do. I mean, that's a fantastic marketing tool. Oh, by the way, do you want data analytics of when they scanned it and how long between the time they bought it at the checkout and maybe they opened it and shared it on, and all that kind of stuff is absolute marketing gold. But to make that happen, you've got to go and talk to people and say, you know that stripy barcode? Yeah, it's time to change that for this one. So you're right, it is a two-way thing. And we have this thing called, we keep changing the word, ambition. Ambition 2027. But by the end of 2027, brands and retailers will be able to certainly have that two-dimensional barcode on. As I say, all the major scanner manufacturers and print manufacturers are already on board with this. And so the 1D barcode is not going to disappear anytime soon. It will still be there. There is a transition period, but the momentum is clearly heading towards it. You all want trusted information that I can promise you is correct. I promise you this is not correct. It's not sourced. I can't give you the actual source of this other than the fact it was my mate who told me. There's something like 20, 25 million products with this thing on it already, and it's growing very, very rapidly.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we've done a couple of solutions or pilots of the solutions with this, right?
In fact, you did one of the very first with I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the Slovenian name. There's a really, really, really good chicken farmer not far from Ljubljana. And as you've done with Garrett's company, you scan that, uses GS1 standards, you end up with trusted, verifiable information about just how good that chicken is. It's really cool.
Yeah, that one's been very popular. People love the chicken. We did a similar thing also with not whiskey yet, Poitin, right, which we showcased at the GS1 Global Forum. I think it's just a nice way of so yes, verifiability, that's the kind of the cornerstone, but it also gives then the customers a way to engage with a product on the level and the way that it suits them. So it's something that you can't do with static interfaces, and I think that's why it's a really nice combination with digital ink and all these things. Sorry, Garrett, you wanted to.
I suppose as part of that, there was also the kind of the small language model idea, and introducing that into, say, our business or other businesses, where you can keep that engagement going. So if somebody scans, they enter onto your website, but then it's like, well, hello, what else would you like to know? And the other thing, just as nearly my final point, if you will, is the ability for AI for mass customization or personalization, and that's what I'm really interested in. I want to keep them in our kind of world, engage with them, give them meaningful engagement, but offer them value on the personalization. So it's like, I really enjoyed that single malt. When are you making that again? And we tell them, would you like to personalize it? Would you like to send 6 of them out to your friends and family? Do you want to add a note? Things like that. I think we can give them incredible value. And here's the thing, at scale. So not just one person, 1,000 people, all within the same week. And I think we can build digital systems to be able to do that. Of course, we'll be monitoring, but I think we can personalize at massive scale. But I think the small language model, I think, is an interesting take on that meaningful engagement once you have your customer.
Yeah, maybe John,
Yeah, I'm a big fan of disintermediation, taking out the middlemen. If we look at that dollar and we break it down about who gets the margin, we need to really understand that, which is what I mentioned earlier with supply chain mapping and stuff. So governments understand the benefits of AI, and I advise governments all over the world in industry, whether it's Vietnam or Laos or Canada or US, but they mature at different levels as well. So for example, I have a colleague in Canada, he's a lawyer, and he had to use freedom of information to find out if the government of Canada is using AI in the food sector to do the regulations. And through freedom of information, they said yes. Here's where we're using AI. We're using AI in risk management for products coming in. That's fine, but they don't want to publish that yet because they have to prove it out a little bit more. Whereas now I have a request from another Canadian government department in product and consumer safety. They say, we need you to train our government inspectors as to how products come into Canada. What? What? How products come into Canada? Don't they come in, your export controls and everything? They go, no, that's not the problem. The biggest problem we have right now is consumer. There are packages coming to consumers. And it's also resale of things like buggies. Well, I go, okay, hang on. I wrote a paper for the EU on resale of secondhand goods, on traceability. It's a difficult challenge. So what the government, this other government ministry, or two of them in fact, want to figure out, how are products coming into Canada? Are they compliant with Canadian regulations? And how can we educate and protect consumers? There's different demographics that are involved here. Girls at certain ages, they'll buy products. Guys at certain ages will buy products. Adults, a little bit older. So there's certain things tied up in there. But governments know that AI is critical to moving forward. The risk is that they'll over-regulate and will stifle innovation. So in, what was it, 1893 or something, quote me on that or correct me on that if I'm wrong, 1893 in the US, a motorized vehicle could only drive at 5 miles per hour, and during the hours of darkness, somebody had to walk in front of it with a red lantern. A red lantern. So we've come a long way, right? We've come a long way in that. But that was the momentum at the time, allegedly the momentum at the time of the conversations were, we just need faster horses, not motorized vehicles, right? So the world has changed and evolves pretty quickly. AI will be a critical part of what the government do, especially in the area of border controls. I think Phil talked about that earlier, and I was involved in that in a previous cycle when I was at GS1. But one quick funny anecdote, I have a buddy of mine, I won't say which country he's from, but they used to be part of the EU. And he submitted his tax returns, and the revenue agency called him up and said, this doesn't compute. This is your tax returns, but this is your LinkedIn profile and all the things you're talking about. Here is the Twitter post you're making, and here are all your vacations on Facebook. So there's something wrong here. So they're pulling data from multiple sources, and they pulled him in and said, something is not right here. Now, so my point there is that different government departments will have different uses of technologies and to be able to make sense of what's going on.
Yeah, that's a very interesting example. You got to be careful out there. But I would love to keep the conversation going, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. So I would give everybody 30 seconds for maybe just some closing thoughts, and then we can open up a minute or two just to see if there are any questions in the audience. And maybe Seamus, do you want to go ahead and start? But let's keep it really to 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think, as someone who's been, I suppose, involved in piloting and experimenting and deploying AI, I think you learn a lot by doing in the space, but it's also important. I think AI are very involved in governance, the governance aspects as well, and notified bodies. So I think it's governance with enablement, and getting that balance right, I think, is important, and one not stopping the other. But getting a balance between both, and keeping the human in the loop, keeping it human-centric, I think, is key.
Okay, thanks, Seamus. Yeah, maybe Marjolein, you want to?
Yep, 30 seconds.
30 seconds on the time.
No, my last comment would be, don't approach regulation only as a threat or hampering innovation. It is also an opportunity, and there's regulatory instruments out there that actually enhance innovation and new developments, and that is underestimated until now.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's a very valid point as well. Garrett.
Yes. I'm not good at 30 seconds, but I'm tremendously excited for the future. In whiskey terms, we always think in decades. You know, where I need to make a 10-year single malt now. You know, I'm really, really excited when I kind of project forward, and everything that I'm learning about AI and everything that's surrounded around decentralized knowledge graphs. When I think about where we could be in 5 years' time, I think that's a genuine leap in humanity, actually, at the pace that this is going. I would encourage people to think in terms of 5 and 10 years and not get so caught up in the newspaper headlines, on the daily basis. So to think long term, even thinking short term, the 5-year plans is thinking long term in terms of this world. And I'm really encouraged where the direction of travel. Yeah.
Thanks, Garrett.
Yep.
John.
By being here at this conference, you're already very smart, very clever, because you're at the future. You're at the start. The future is in your hands. What I would say, based on my experience growing up and maturing in the industry, too many people got religion. And we're a Microsoft religion, we're a Google religion, we're an SAP religion. Please don't get religion. Think about interoperability, think about collaboration, think about working together, because that's the key to success. What OriginTrail is provided here is a platform, a framework, an ecosystem for us all to enable that. The future is in your hands.
Certainly is. I think the thing that worries me about all this is the people. Don't underestimate the importance of the people rather than the technology. And there are people who have data you want who won't give it to you. And there are people who you want to trust, but you can't really get the stuff that they've got. And so technology, as I said right at the very start, garbage in, garbage out. You want the gold technology, but the people who've got that golden data, they're going to charge you for it or whatever. And so this utopian world where everything is trusted and everything is verifiable does depend on people giving you their data or you being prepared to pay for it, sadly. I wish that were not true.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, everyone. I think, how are we on time? Do we have a minute or two for a question from the audience, or should we? Okay. Then if anyone has a question, we can, we're around except for Seamus.
We're here all day.
But we can relay questions to Seamus if needed. So I would say a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you very much. It was a great discussion.